and she would not be seen as Romani. If my son married a non-Romani girl, she would become my daughter. She wouldn't become Romani because she wouldn't have the blood, but her children would be seen as Romani. But it all has to do with this idea of keeping a distance. And for that reason, a lot of conservative Roma in this country won't send the kids to school, particularly beyond puberty, because it would mean being in a non-Romani environment, eating food in the cafeteria prepared by Gage. It would mean mixed classrooms. It would mean being exposed to cultural values which sometimes can be completely opposite from Romani ones. I could give you some examples, but I think you get the idea. Yes?
I was wondering if the early Roma, it was more of a matriarchal culture earlier, and is it more, it sounds like, is it more patriarchal, or is it an egalitarian culture?
Where did you get the idea that it was used to be matriarchal?
I'm curious. Well, there's the, I don't know, there's the roots of the cards, you know, like there's the deck of cards that have kind of come along, and then there's the tarot, and I don't really know, that's why I'm asking you. I mean, I hear different things, and I'd just like to hear from you. Was there ever like a more matriarchal?
Not really. Although women have the ultimate power in a way, because they can pollute a man. There are certain times when a woman is seen as in an unclean state and is therefore in a position to defile a man. And in that respect, she could use that to get her own way, and some wives do.
What would the unclean state be?
Well, menstruation, childbirth. If there were Roma in this room, and I know there's one or two Tierti San Madrid, I couldn't talk about menstruation and stuff. All of that's taboo in mixed company. But I know y'all don't mind about it.
The Laplanders, would they be a group that you said they went to the exterior? Are the Laplanders Roma?
No.
The Vlachs that are in Bulgaria, are they Roma?
Yes. Well,
Or
that's a good question. Vlach is kind of a confusing term because there's a kind of Romanian population who are called Vlach. And that's usually spelled V-L-A-C-H. And they're in Greece and Bulgaria and so on, but they're Romanian. The ones we call Vlach, we use the Romani spelling, which is V-L-A-X, and we use an X for Ch.
I live in San Francisco near Union Square, and there's a restaurant down there on Post Street called Zingari, which is the Italian word that they use for gypsies. And I called the restaurant to try to explain to him, the owner, that this was insulting. And he went through a long sort of trope about how the restaurant likes to pick from different parts of Italy and sort of wander around Italy, you know, in the cuisine sense. And I tried to explain to him that was also insulting. But he was originally from India, this owner. Oh. And he said that the word zingari sounds really similar to a word in his language, which means like spark or flame, like when you first fall in love, like different applications you can use for this. But he was trying to make it a positive term, but I was trying to explain to him in Italian, it's like the equivalent of the N-word in our culture. So could you speak about that word in Italian and how it's perceived, used by Italians and perceived by Italian Roma?
Well, it was one of the early suggestions for the name of the population was that it sounds like an Indian word. And there was an early 18th century map of India with an area called Singania, which got taken out of later editions because somebody, I think, just filled it in just for the sake of it, to make a case. It's just one of these words, Singani, Tsigoina, it's just a variation of all of that. There is a gift shop in Austin where I live, and it's called Gypsy's Treasures. And I called up there one day and I said, "Why don't you call yourself Zulu's Treasures?" She said, "Well, I'm not a Zulu." I said, "But you're not a gypsy either." She said, "Well, it's because it's light-hearted and everything." And I mean, that's... It wouldn't be offensive if people realized that it's in play, but the association is seen as real. There's a show that was hugely popular in Britain and became hugely popular here called My Big Fat Gypsy Wedding. You all heard of that? It's about Irish people. They are not Roma. But it was so popular and made such a profit for the advertisers that National Geographic has now produced a 6-part series about American gypsies. And they have found, and I'm ashamed to say this, but they have found an actual Romani family from New York who are the most disgusting, ignorant people. They're just nasty people. They're shunned by the Romani population in New York, and they've made themselves available to National Geographic, who have followed them on a fishing trip to Florida, to the mall. And this is going to be broadcast. We're trying so hard to stop it, but it's ended production, and it should be out soon. But once again, it's presenting Roma as figures of fun, really. Exotic, peculiar gypsies. And they're going to use gypsy, they're not going to use Roma. And we just cannot stop them. It's very difficult to try and turn back the tide.
Who started using the word gypsy instead of Roma?
Well, no, gypsy's the older word.
Okay.
I mean, Roma is the oldest word because it's always been there. But gypsy started being used in English in Elizabethan times.
Okay.
But it used to be Egyptian,
Right.
and then the E dropped off, and there was an apostrophe, and it was Gypsian, which incidentally is probably why gypsy is often spelt with a small g, because the capital E got lost. But if you ever write it, and we're trying to get rid of the word altogether, but if you do use it, at least give it a proper nouns, capital initial letter. Yeah.
Do the people that are from Rajasthan who are Roma consider themselves or use that as their name?
What, gypsy?
Yeah. No, Roma.
No, but the word gypsy is used in India for various, they're called unscheduled tribes, or used to be. But this is because of a British administrator called Ibbotson in the Punjab, about 1870, and he perceived a similarity between nomadic Indian tribes and Roma back in England. And so he gave them this word gypsy. And that has led to all kinds of beautiful coffee table books of Indian tent dwellers and so on. However, there are Indian populations who do seem to be related to us historically. And the Banjara trace their descent from the Rajputs, just as we do. And they send representatives to our meetings. If you look in that, Shani, can you get my book through there? Yeah, if you can see that. Here is even a newspaper, or one of their newspapers, called Roma Banjara, because they regard themselves as the legitimate Indian relatives of us. So can you see that? It's in Devanagari. but it's Roma Banjara. But certainly there are lots and lots of Indian, quotes, gypsy groups who have nothing to do with us whatsoever.
Yes, you have done extensive research on the origins of the people, but has there been the same type of research done on the origins of the gypsy religion that you just described to us?
No. No. It's something that Roma don't talk about very much. And it's not seen as religion. It's just, it's called Romani. It's called gypsiness. But it's never called religion. But it is. I mean, it has. We believe in Odel and Obeng, as God and the devil. There are also a number of Indian deities that are remembered. There's Kali Durga, and there's a pilgrimage in the south of France each year. There are proverbs that talk about Vayu, who is the Hindu god of the wind, and there is Maruti, and various other names of Indian deities are remembered, even if they're not contextualized. But the actual spiritual beliefs have to do with internal purity and the maintenance of cleanliness, and that's how you prepare food and how men and women and people and animals and so on. It's complicated.
It almost sounds like the customs were taken like the food, like everything else, from wherever they traveled. Because some of it sounds Orthodox Jewish to me.
Well, there are similarities. You got kosher and treif.
Right. It's separate dishes.
But that is, there's no direct connection between Roma and Jews, except that both populations being shunned for so long and being kept out when you're not allowed to buy food in stores or use water from the town pump, then hygiene becomes a premium, keeping clean. And I often think about how Roma and Jews in the concentration camps could maintain religious observance and personal hygiene. It must have been absolute hell. And by the way, Roma and Jews were the only two populations in the Holocaust targeted by the final solution, victims of genocide. And the fate of Roma in the Holocaust is not so well known because we haven't had the scholars, but we are rapidly finding out so much more. I got a call from a French organization less than a week ago. They had been in Belarus and found 48 killing centers just for Roma that had never been documented. And they interviewed elderly non-Roma who had actually observed the mass killings, the SS and so on. And they've got these testimonies. But all of this kind of stuff has never been in the record. But we're beginning to fill in the gaps now. And there's an urgency here because the survivors are getting old. Yeah.
The example you gave of the onion, you see, is that the same for the music, Roma music?
Romani music is a bit like Romani cuisine. Because of the diaspora, it differs from place to place. You could argue that there are Indian retentions in certain areas. For example, in Spain, there are certainly, in flamenco, there's Karnataka type of thing, hand gestures and so on, and saitas, and which seem to have an Indian origin. The classical tradition in Hungary, you have the Bhairava scale, the 12-note chromatic scale, which is Indian. And there are other things. I talk about them in here. There's the Pilivani wrestling. You know about this, where the men cover themselves in oil and wrestle. And then there's stick fighting, and there's snake charming you can find amongst Roma in the Balkans. Those kinds of things are little legacies from India. But the music, I have a colleague who is examining certain kinds of Romani music, and generally the Balkan type has been, the style has been attributed to the Turkish style. He argues, of course he's an Indian, so he's arguing that even the Islamic Middle Eastern style was introduced to the Muslims by the Indians in the first place. And certain instruments, like a zurna, for example, have their origins in Indian instruments. But we'll see. We'll see where this goes.
On the ritual purity, even in India, even today, in north and south, we have ritual purity as vessels and so are concerned. So it's not necessary that it was absorbed from so it may have come up with that.
Yeah, I mean, I prefer to think that everybody's contributed, you know. Even Indian food, northern Indian food, has a Mughal origin that we think of Indian. Anyway.